Hey, future respiratory therapist, I'm going to try to do this for you in under 10 minutes. Okay, so this is a concept on the board here: I time, E time, total cycle time, I to E ratio, how to calculate them, understanding how to get these numbers, more importantly, understanding why they are important. Okay, when we talk about mechanical ventilation, these are things that are typically glossed over. You think, oh, that's not really that important. As long as I understand AC, PC, APRV, PRVC, bilevel, the modes, then I'm going to be fine. If I understand tidal volume and rate, I'm going to be good. If I understand PEEP and FiO2, then I'll be good. But you're missing a big part of the puzzle if you don't understand I to E ratio and understanding how I time affects E time and how total cycle time comes in and affects all of it. Okay, so here we go. The first thing you have to do is know how to calculate these values. Okay, so we're going to start with I time here. Okay, so everybody knows that our formula for calculating I time, when you're in volume control, this is talking about delivering a set tidal volume. If you're going to deliver a set volume, the amount of time it takes to deliver that set volume depends on how fast you're delivering that set volume, okay? So you have to understand that first of all. What's my tidal volume? Because that's the amount that's going to be delivered. And then how fast am I giving it? So that brings us back to flow, okay? So when we talk about I time, we're talking about I time equals tidal volume divided by flow, and this is in liters per second, not liters per minute, okay? And that's the biggest part of this formula that you have to remember, okay? It's liters per second, which means you have to take your set liters per minute, divide them by 60, and that will tell you your flow in liters per second, okay? So, for example, let's just say we have a tidal volume of 500 set, and we're on a flow of 60 liters per minute. So if we divide 60 by 60, that equals 1. So 500 divided by 1 equals 500. And that's 0.5 because this 500 mLs should be turned into 5.5 liters because we're dealing with liters per minute, which we turn into liters per second. Okay? So 0.5 divided by 1 is 0.5. Now, if you have a hard time understanding I time, just remember this. Always remember that if you're on a flow of 60, then your I time is the same as your tidal volume in liters. Okay? So just like this, we're on 500 milliliters, which is 0.5 liters. Flow of 60 divided by 60 gives us 1, so our I time is 0.5, just like our tidal volume is 0.5 liters. If we're on a tidal volume of 0.400, okay, then our I time will be 0.4 seconds if we're on a flow of 60. Now, hang with me for just a second, okay? Because if you're on a flow of 60 and your I time is equivalent to your tidal volume, okay, meaning your tidal volume is 0.4 liters, then your I time is 0.4 seconds, then you can rationalize out what your I time is if your flow isn't 60 liters per minute. So, for example, 0.400 at a flow of 50 liters per minute is going to be a little greater than 0.4 seconds. Does that make sense? If I'm on 50 liters per minute, then I'm giving the breath slower than if I was on 60 liters per minute. Therefore, my I time is going to be slightly longer. Okay? If I'm giving 400 milliliters, which is 0.4 liters, at 70 liters per minute, then my I time is going to be slightly less than 0.4 seconds. Okay? Now, I do this so that you have a frame of reference. Because if you can understand that concept that at 60 liters per minute, my I time is 0.4 seconds. They're the same. That makes sense. So if I'm slower than 60, my I time is going to be greater than 0.4 seconds. If I'm delivering my breath at flows greater than 60 liters per minute, say 70 or 80, then my I time is going to be less than 0.4 seconds. Now, that doesn't tell you what it actually is, okay? You still have to calculate it to know exactly what your I time is. But how many RTs do you see running around with calculators calculating I time every single patient ventilator assessment check? Not that many, right? Like, let's just be honest. Like, I'm sure a calculator is part of your clinical obligation to bring. I'm sure it is. But when you're observing other RTs, do you actually see them pulling out a calculator and calculating this stuff? Absolutely not, right? And the reason being, at least if you're following me, is because I have a frame of reference, okay? And my frame of reference tells me where in the ballpark my I time is. And I'm not even going to be concerned with what the actual number is unless I have an actual problem or unless I'm taking an exam that asks me what's the I time if your tidal volume is 600 mLs and you're on a flow of 70. Well, then you obviously have to calculate it. But you can eliminate everything, all the answers, okay, that are greater than 0.6. So if you're on a tidal volume of 600 and a flow of 70, okay, then you're going to do 0.6 divided by your flow. Now, if it was 60, you would know that your I time was 0.6, okay? But you're on 70, which means your flow is greater than 60, which means your I time is going to be less than 0.6. And you can probably eliminate 2 to 3 answers just with that rationality thinking, okay? Just with that rational thinking, you're going to say, oh, I can eliminate all of these except for this. This must be the answer, okay? So understand that. That's common sense understanding of I time and how it makes sense. Reference everything back to 60 liters per minute and watch if your life doesn't simplify when you're understanding and calculating and learning how to deal with I times, okay? So that's I time. That one's probably the more complex of the two formulas we're going to talk about, or 3 formulas we're going to talk about today. I time is probably the most complex, okay? So I'm going to erase this. My eraser isn't working very good here today. Okay? Because we've got I time out of the way, okay? So now let's talk about total cycle time, because that's the only one between I time, E time, and total cycle time. You can't calculate E time directly. It's indirectly calculated, okay? So you have to know how to calculate total cycle time. Now, total cycle time is what I like to call easy. Take your respiratory rate and divide it. Take 60 seconds in a minute and divide it by your breaths per minute, or your respiratory rate, or your frequency, whatever you call it, okay? So if you're on a rate of 12, then you simply do 60 divided by 12 equals 5 seconds, okay? If you're on a rate of, let's say 60, and you're on a rate of 15, then you're going to do 60 divided by 15 breaths per minute, and you're going to have a total cycle time of 4 seconds. Okay? If you're on a rate of 20, then you're going to have a total cycle time of 3 seconds. Now, what total cycle time tells you is that this is the entire time, the entire cycle of inspiratory phase and the expiratory phase. Okay, so this is the total time that you have to get the breath in and the breath out before the next breath is coming back in. Okay, total cycle time. Obviously, a rate of 12 gives you much more time to get your breath in and out as opposed to a rate of 20 where you only have 3 seconds to get the volume in and to allow the volume to come out. If you're on a rate of 30, then you only have 2 seconds to get the breath in and the breath out before the next breath is coming. Okay, so you can see kind of how respiratory rate has a big role in allowing air to come out after the breath is delivered. Okay, so that's total cycle time. Okay, so let me give you a scenario here and we'll show you. Well, before we do the scenario, let me talk about this. E-time. I told you E-time is calculated indirectly, and that's because you have to calculate your total cycle time first and then your I-time, and you subtract those two. If your total cycle time is 4 seconds, okay, this is total cycle time, then you simply subtract your I-time, okay? Let's say we're on a tidal volume of 500 mLs. That's 0.5 liters, and we're on a flow of 60. Then our I-time, we've already talked about this, is 0.5 seconds, okay? So if our I-time is 0.5 seconds, then that means our E-time must be 3.5 seconds. So that means you're taking a half a second to get the breath in and then giving 3.5 seconds to get the breath out before the next breath is coming. Okay? All right, that should make sense, right? Now from this, you can calculate your I to E ratio, because from here you understand that your I time is 0.5, your E time is 3.5. Now, I to E ratio only tells you what a parts to parts, okay? So let me say that a different way. When you calculate this, you're going to get an I time of 1 to something. That doesn't mean that your I time is 1 second. It just means that for every 1 part inspiratory, you're spending X amount of parts in expiratory phase. Okay? So if we do it like this, we got to get our I time to 1 part. So to get this to 1, we have to divide by 0.5, and that will give us 1. And we should do the same over here, and this will be 7. Okay? So for this example, we have a total cycle time of 4 seconds because we're on a rate of 15. We had an I time of 0.5 because if you remember, we were on a tidal volume of 500 at a flow of 60. That gave us an E time of 3.5. When we compare those two, that gives us an I to E ratio of 1 to 7 seconds. That should be adequate for most of your patients. Okay? A 1, you're telling me that the inspiratory phase, for every 1 part of inspiratory phase, we have 7 parts expiratory phase. So the expiratory phase is 7 times longer than the inspiratory phase. And that should be enough time to allow for most of your patients to get all of their volume out. We know that the normal healthy adult typically has an I to E ratio of 1 to 2. Our obstructive lung diseases, our CBABs, specifically asthma and emphysema, are going to require a slightly longer I to E. So a 1 to 3, 1 to 4, maybe a 1 to 5. Okay, so if we think about that, then you see 1 to 7, and you shouldn't be too concerned with air trapping, which brings us to the why. Why does all of this matter? Because an inadequate I to E ratio will result in air trapping in your normal patient or your obstructive lung disease patient. Okay, now 1 to 2 for your normal patient, for your restrictive lung disease should be significant. Okay, but a 1 to 2 for your emphysematic or for your asthmatic patient will not be sufficient. You will have to give them a shorter I time or a longer E time. Now, the only way we can establish a longer E time is either by making the total cycle time longer or by decreasing the I time. Okay, so you can either increase the flow, you can decrease the tidal volume because the tidal volume was part of the formula for establishing I time, or you can decrease the respiratory rate. Decreasing the respiratory rate will extend your total cycle time, okay, and give you more time for exhalation, okay? But you need to understand this. Adjusting the flow is typically your first choice or your first, your most desirable action, because adjusting the flow doesn't affect minute ventilation. If you decrease tidal volume to decrease your I time, you're going to decrease total minute volume. If you decrease your rate to extend total cycle time, you're going to decrease your minute volume. Okay? Now, those two things can adversely affect your arterial blood gas. We already know this, right? And you can find yourself playing this game where you decrease the rate and increase the tidal volume and all this different stuff to try to maintain a normal minute volume to sustain a normal blood gas, where you could have just started with your flow. That would decrease your I time, make your E time longer, and extend your I to E ratio, and hopefully help reduce the air trapping, okay? Now, as I said a lot, in about 16 minutes, I'm going to do one example and let you see how this all plays together, okay? So, what we're going to do here is, let's just say we're on AC with a rate of 20, a tidal volume of, let's say, 400 mLs, let's say a flow of let's just say 60 liters per minute. Okay? So these are our basic settings that are going to come into this conversation, talking about I time, E time, total cycle time, I to E ratio, okay? So the first question is, what is our I time? So if we say I time, question mark, we got to calculate it. If I say E time, we got to calculate it. If I say what's our total cycle time, we have to calculate it. If I say what's our I to E ratio, we have to calculate it, okay? So starting off with our I time, we know we have 400 mLs. We're going to turn that into liters, which is 0.4 liters. We divide that by our flow in liters per second, which is 60 liters per minute. Divide that by 60 to get it in the liters per second. So we're talking 0.4 divided by 1 equals 0.4 seconds. That's our I time. Okay? Now what's our E time? We don't know yet, because to get our E time, we have to know our total cycle time. We get our total cycle time by saying 60 seconds. We're giving 20 breaths. Okay? So 60 divided by 20 equals 3 seconds. Okay? This is our total cycle time. So every 3 seconds there's a breath going in and coming out. 0.4 of that is inspiration. Okay? Everything else is expiration. So to get E time, now we can say 3 seconds from our total cycle time minus 0.4 seconds equals 2.6 seconds. And that is our E time. Okay? Now, to get our I to E ratio, what we have to do is calculate it. So I'm pulling my calculator up here, because what we're going to do is we're going to say our I time is 0.4 seconds. Our E time is 2.6 seconds. So we're going to divide this I time, we're going to make this a 1 part, so we divide it by itself, and we're going to divide that by the same. And what that's going to give us is a 1, 2, 2.6 divided by 0.4 is 6.5. That's our I to E ratio for this scenario. Again, that should be sufficient for just about all of your patients. But if you ever calculate an IDE ratio that's 1 to 1.5, 1 to 2 for your emphysematic or your asthmatic patients, they're probably air trapping. You can probably look at your airway graphics and see that your flow waveform is not returning to baseline. And that's because the expiratory phase is not sufficient to allow for complete emptying of the lungs. So we need to decrease I time. That will extend E time and allow for a longer time to exhale. I hope this helps. This is a very intriguing and a complicated concept. I hope it makes sense. If it doesn't, put your questions in the comments below and I'll address them, and we can do more scenarios. We can do whatever you guys want to do, okay? Hope everything is working out good for you. I hope you're preparing for finals, and I wish you all the best of luck.